Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into how a single comment from a Japanese official about Taiwan blew up into a massive diplomatic crisis. We're talking about one statement that turned into a huge strategic showdown.
So how can one little statement cause such a massive international incident? Well, on the surface, sure, it starts with a controversial remark. But the analysis we're looking at today argues that it's way deeper than that. It pulls back the curtain on some serious tensions and strategic chess moves between China, Japan, and even the US.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll look at the diplomatic flashpoint, the shifting alliances, China's interesting response, the legal arguments being made, and what this all means for the new power dynamic in the region. Let's get into it. All right, first up, the flashpoint. Let's set the scene. You've got a high-ranking Japanese official who makes a public statement, and in doing so, stomps right over what China considers its absolute, non-negotiable red line on Taiwan. And boom, instant diplomatic firestorm.
Now, the analysis we're digging into says this wasn't just some slip of the tongue, a diplomatic gaffe. No, it was seen as a deliberate provocation. The source argues that it's actually a sign of this growing movement inside Japan that wants to, let's say, normalize and shake off those post-World War II restrictions. And that, of course, is seen as a huge threat to the peace and stability of the whole region.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. Let's talk about the United States' reaction, or maybe I should say its lack of reaction, because according to this analysis, the U.S. response, or non-response, points to a really subtle but critical shift in that old U.S.-Japan alliance. It tells us a lot about who holds the cards now.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you have Japan's perception that the US has its back, no matter what, an ironclad guarantee, right? But the analysis on the other side paints a very different picture. It suggests the US is basically saying, hold on a minute. They're not about to let an ally, even a close one, drag them into a major crisis. It's like the US isn't willing to hand over the car keys, especially when the destination is a potential showdown with China.
So, what's the evidence for this? Well, the source points to a few things. First, you had pretty restrained, quiet statements from U.S. leaders. No big, loud defense of the Japanese official. Then you have the withdrawal of that typhoon system from Japan, which is seen as a huge strategic signal. Add to that reports from big-name think tanks like Rand Corp, which are basically saying the U.S. isn't so sure it could win a fight against China in the region anymore. Put it all together, and it looks like the U.S. is playing the long game, prioritizing stability with China.
Okay, let's flip the coin and look at China's reaction. You might expect a huge, explosive response to what they saw as a major provocation. But the analysis describes what happened next as, well, surprisingly calm, composed, and really layered.
Yeah, this wasn't some knee-jerk emotional outburst. The analysis we're looking at frames this as a very calculated, very deliberate strategy coming from a position of serious confidence. The response was fast, it was precise, and it was all about sending a crystal-clear message without letting the whole thing spiral out of control.
The source calls it a toolbox of countermeasures, which I think is a great way to put it. They didn't just bring out a sledgehammer. First, they used the smaller tools, diplomatic warnings, travel advisories. Then they moved up to limiting some cultural and academic exchanges. And finally, they started applying targeted economic pressure, hitting specific imports like aquatic products and beef. It was a step-by-step escalation, designed to turn up the heat slowly and precisely. But here's a really crucial piece of the puzzle. According to the source, China's strategy wasn't just about diplomatic warnings or economic sanctions. Nope. A huge part of it was about the law. The analysis really emphasizes how China went out of its way to build its case on a foundation of international law and old historical agreements. Why do that? Well, it's all about claiming the legal and moral high ground. By constantly pointing back to these historical documents, the argument becomes, hey, this isn't just us disagreeing with you today. This is you, Japan, violating your own legally binding promises from after World War II. It's a powerful way to frame the issue.
So let's look at the documents. The first big one they bring up is the Cairo Declaration from 1943. This was an agreement between the Allied leaders during the war, and the analysis highlights it as the legal bedrock for their argument. It basically says the territories Japan took from China, and this is key, it specifically mentions Taiwan, have to be given back.
And to back that up, they point to the Potsdam Proclamation from 1945. This document laid out the terms of Japan's surrender, and it says explicitly that the terms of the Cairo Declaration shall be carried out. It essentially blocks it in. So you see the strategy here. The goal is to take this out of the realm of today's politics and frame it as a matter of settled historical international law.
So where is all this heading? What's the end game? According to the source material, China isn't just playing defense here. It argues that China is using this crisis to proactively push for three big long-term goals, essentially trying to completely reset the rules of the game with Japan.
And this table just lays that strategy out so clearly. Goal number 1, reinforce that red line. Force Japan to publicly walk back the comments to make it clear that Taiwan is absolutely non-negotiable. Goal 2, reaffirm Japan's status. Use this as a chance to remind Japan and the rest of the world about its post-war obligations. And goal number 3, and this is a big one, correct what the source calls Japan's misjudgment. Basically force Japan to take a hard, realistic look at who holds more power in the relationship today. So when you put it all together, the source concludes that this is all about setting a new track for the future. The ultimate aim is to use China's current strength to draw a very clear line in the sand, a lane that Japan is expected to stay in to make sure something like this never happens again.
And that really leaves us with a huge, lingering question, doesn't it? In a world where power is always shifting, how do you solve today's problems when they're tangled up in deep historical wounds and agreements? It's one of the toughest challenges we face today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.